will need to consider. And great cue, good timing, Keisha. Also record it, because then we'll be able to come back around and use this as an ongoing resource. I know that in the past, Yi has sent this out to everyone afterwards, so you'll be able to look back at this and remember either the good times we had or all of the dense content that we covered. I'm okay if you want to call it either one. So with that, let me go ahead. I'm going to share my screen. There is a lot of good resources. Hang on one second. I picked the wrong. Okay, here we go. So this is our school safety planning webinar. The presentation slides are available to you within the Google resource folder that I have set up for you. The link to get into that is bit.ly/CSSP workshop. And within those bit.ly, sorry, I'm going to bring up my chat window. There it is. Thank you, Yi. And then I'll drop this in so that can also be a live link so that you can click right on that and get into the folder. Let me go ahead and jump in there. I'm going to give you a tour of what that has within. So once you open up the folder, this is the default view that you're going to see. It'll be icons. I'm kind of a fan of list view, so I'm going to jump over to that view right now. What we've got is the webinar handouts. If you're an old school 3-slide PowerPoint handout person and you just love the paper, go for it. You can print it out and have it to take notes for today. We also have the full screen slides that you can move through and refer back to as a resource later. And anything that we have in here, anything that I share and you're curious or you want to have the template directly or the resource directly, hit me with an email. At the end of the day, I'm going to share with you my contact information so you can directly contact me. And you can also contact Michael because he is really your county technical assistance provider. He and I have been working really closely together over the past several years in providing this resource to the districts across Santa Clara County. There's one resource that we're going to be working through today. I find this to be a helpful tool to kind of lay out the skeleton of a school safety plan and the next steps that you would want to follow in order to have a compliant and effective safety plan. This plan prep workbook has 4 pages, and we're going to take 3 breakout room breaks today so that you can go in and actually talk about this with either your district colleagues or your similar school colleagues from other districts. Keisha has set up some breakout rooms in advance. When we go into the breakout room, you'll have the opportunity to choose. If you're here with multiple people within a same school district, you can choose that district. Or if you don't get along with folks in your district, you could choose one of the other breakout rooms as well. We won't tell. That workbook I put in PDF, which is easier to display. And then the Word document original is there. So you can get in and actually edit and type in the document if that's easier. Within the resource folder, I've got a folder with some policy, legislation information. A lot of the ed code sections that I cite are included in this. Some of the newer ones, and I'm going to share a legislative update, are not included in this yet. But the update kind of summarizes where we are with that bill. I've got some plan samples. I should even pull templates off of there because I'm not a fan of safety plan templates, mostly because the most important part of any safety plan development is the process that you go through to develop that plan. And what I have found with templates is that it gets very tempting to cut and paste and drop in a new school name and call yourself having a safety plan. And I would strongly advise you to jump through the hoops of developing your own safety plan. It will be more effective and a better fit for your district and your school site. Near the end of the presentation today, I'm going to talk about how safety planning can be framed up within a multi-tiered system of support. I think that MTSS can help us better organize everything that we do in education And by the way, I don't think that's just education. I originally started my career in public health. That's where I first learned about multi-tiered system of support, because it's called the public health model. And then the other two tools are a couple of additional resources that supplement safety planning. We're going to talk about crisis response and violence prevention, and Michael is really going to take the lead on that because he has expertise in that area. And we'll talk about assessment tools that I have that can support you as well. I may not specifically talk about all of these documents, so that's why I wanted to give you a real thorough tour up front and then get started. So one of the things that we had sent out in advance and I wanted to touch on before we just plow ahead is our introductions and the Jamboard. So if you haven't had an opportunity yet, this is the bit.ly link to get into that Jamboard. Let me drop this in to the chat box. And basically what I've asked people to take a look at is, one, introduce yourself, but then let us know what your expectations are for the training today. So that we can make sure that we touch on it, or if we're not going to touch on it today, because some things are just outside the scope of what we're trying to accomplish in today's workshop, then we can point you in the right direction on where you might get those resources, or put it in our parking lot that we can follow up on later. And if this were an in-person training, I would show you a cool little flip chart. It would be our parking lot. I'd walk over to the wall and, you'd have that visual prompt like, oh, he's parking lotting that item. But today we'll just keep it on the side and I'll let you know if it's an item that we need to move on from and parking lot. So the overview, what we're going to cover today, and I've already hit some of the items on this slide. We're talking about the mandates. You can go really deep in school safety planning. I've had people ask me before, what kind of a position would it take to do a full and comprehensive school safety plan and essentially run that all year long to make sure that everything is done fantastically. And in my opinion, you could assign a full-time person to do that for a single school site. That's how deep and integrated I think school safety is across everything that we do. I don't know if we have anybody here that school safety is specifically their full-time gig. Maybe Michael. Is there anybody else in the room that school safety is your full-time gig? I see no Zoom hands. I see no one jumping in. So this is all one of many hats that many of us wear. And actually, while I'm talking about hats that we wear, I realized that I failed to actually introduce myself. Michael said that this is Ken and he's going to introduce himself, and off I went. I'll apologize right now. You'll find me doing that. You'll find me chasing a couple squirrels throughout the presentation. That's part of what I think makes it fun. But of course, then sometimes I miss key points. My name is Ken Fitzgerald, and I'm a school safety planning consultant and school safety and school climate. Because really, safe schools begins with how our teachers, our students, and staff feel while they're on campus. So I think school climate almost comes before school safety, and you'll see that come up today. For the last, almost 15 years now, I've worked specifically with school safety and climate. I worked for 10 years at the Stanislaus County Office of Education and left there when I was the director of Safe and Supportive Schools. And now my day job is the director of student support programs for Patterson Unified School District. And I've been doing that for the last 3 years. And actually, while I'm doing introductions, sorry for the clanging in the background that you might hear. That's my assistant. Her name is Maisie Rose, and you'll see her tail flicker by every so often in the background. So sorry if that's a distraction for you. It's better this way, trust me. So I'm a fairly informal and kind of casual presenter. If at any point you have a question, we've got a small group today. I would encourage you, unmute, jump in, ask that question, put it in the chat box, and we are all going to be keeping an eye on chat box, and really hit us with anything. I'm game for it. Again, if it's something that I don't know, parking lot it. I'll come back to you later. So for today, we're going to cover the comprehensive school safety plan, and that's covered, that's laid out and described by Education Code 32280 to 32289. There are two supplemental plans that I'm going to discuss briefly. We've got a couple of slides on both of them, and these are what I call plug-in plans. These were plans that were put into place and required for schools by legislators who didn't want to dip into the whole pool of comprehensive school safety planning. And these are really specific targeted issues on school campuses that we do need to make sure that we're addressing. And then as we talk about how we develop this, we're going to follow a 7-step planning process that was first laid out by the California Department of Education. Gosh, I think they first published this planning guide in 2002. They've recently partnered with LACO, LA County Office of Ed, to develop a new planning process. And then they provided that planning process to another organization to publish and distribute. So to be quite honest, I'm not trying to throw shade. It's a little complicated to get my hands on. And so I am continuing to use the 7-step planning process. I think that planning process is still the same. It's an important process on how we include and engage all of our key educational partners in order to develop a safety plan that addresses our needs. And then in the end, like I mentioned, we'll talk about safety planning in the MTSS framework. There's a lot of folks that contributed to the information and the resources that are shared today. Really the framework and the key outline of this workshop was developed by the California School Law Enforcement Partnership. This was a collaborative group that was represented by county offices of education across the entire state. We had one county office for every region of the California County Superintendent Educational Services Association, or SCCOE. A great collaborative. They really were the initiators of this work. And then as I talk about PBIS and MTSS and some of the data systems I'm going to talk about, all of these partners were part of that. California Department of Ed, Orange County, Butte County, Swift Center. That's the California Scaling Up MTSS initiative. And then the National PBIS Technical Assistance Center. You know, the great thing about PBIS for Santa Clara County is that you guys have one of the leading regional technical assistance centers in the state. So if you are interested in learning more about PBIS, if you haven't already, it's time to get on board. Then I would encourage you to reach out to Santa Clara and start that work. Exciting stuff. But this isn't a PBIS training, so let me get back into this. When we talk about school safety planning, a lot of times it ends up that someone put it in a binder at some point and it's dusty on your shelf. One of the legal requirements for school safety planning is that we have to have it accessible for parents and staff to review at any time. So technically, a parent should be able to walk into your front office, ask for a copy of the safety plan, and you should be able to pull it off the shelf and show it to them right there on the spot. The template that I'm going to share with you, the model that I'm going to share with you today is one that I developed for a small school district, which is actually where I live. And this model I've been using for more than 10 years now. And I like it because it includes just enough information to be effective. It doesn't overly share information that parents don't really need to have their hands on, and that we're legally allowed to not share with them. And it's only 27 pages. Sometimes we get stuck with these safety plans that are so dense and so fat. Some of the models that I've looked at have 300 pages. And what ends up, the length of those plans really comes from our board policies, because we're required to include some items that are already board policies. So folks take the entire board policy, which if you've ever printed a board policy, 3 of those pages are just references to other policies, right? It's just that listed policy. Well, then we stick that entire thing into a safety plan, and very quickly, our safety plan becomes really inaccessible by most people. So what I want to do, I want to take a moment and stop talking, give you guys an opportunity to introduce yourselves to each other. I know that even within a school district, under the safety lens, sometimes we don't have the opportunity to talk about school safety in our ongoing collaboration time. So you might know each other on other fronts, but now I want you to get to know each other on safety. This is going to be a very brief breakout, so we're probably going to do 5 minutes. So if you're in a larger breakout room, please keep that in mind as you're sharing. But some things that you might want to share. Where is your plan? So do you know, can you go grab it? And you don't have to give an address or anything, but is it on a shelf? Is it in a Google Drive? Is it on your website? Who updates your plan? What does your plan look like? Which picture is it like on the right-hand side, or maybe neither of those? And then how do you share your plan with school staff and other stakeholders? You're not going to be able to answer all of those questions and introduce yourself if you're in a breakout room with even more than 3 people in it. So pick 1 or 2 of those questions that are most meaningful for you, and then introduce yourself. Any questions? Awesome. Well, thank you so much. In 5 minutes, I will see you back. Go ahead and send them away, Keisha.
All rooms are open now, and people can join the room they would like to join.
Good. Welcome back. I see. I had a spotlight on, and so I was looking at my screen. I'm going, "Where is everybody?" And it's like, "Oh, I've got one person spotlighted. That's why." So in your breakout rooms, did you find that you had commonalities? Did you find that folks maybe had the same challenges or structure as you did, or was it all different? So let's say different. No, that's value-based. Let me move on because I think I've got this answer. On the Jamboard, we had all kind of talked about what we wanted to get out of today's presentation. And in this activity, what I found is that we had a lot of commonalities, that we were kind of taking on the school safety plan, maybe new to the process, but now exploring what do we need to have in place, either because we're looking at an old safety plan that we need to update and make sure is current, or maybe we're kind of starting from scratch. Some of us may have had those really large, clunky plans, and so it's not a quick and easy transition to a different format. Sometimes it's a little bit easier to go ahead and update what we have and move forward, but I would encourage you to continue to come back from that, or come back to that throughout the year, and not just look at it as a one-time-a-year activity where you dust off the safety plan, make it compliant, and move on. So of the things, and I kind of moved these around and grouped them, we had folks on the left that were really looking at that comprehensive, what are the minimum requirements? What are the mandates? What do I need to do to be compliant? And then as it moved forward, or moved across to the right, we talked about, or we have folks that are asking about emergency protocols and active shooter response. So crisis response plans are something that we're going to be talking about today, but those are almost plans in and of themselves. That's where we get a lot of technical and tactical details that go into this planning. And today we're going to talk more about the comprehensive aspect of that. What are all of the components that we need to have in place so that we don't have to go into those emergency protocols as frequently, and that our staff are fully prepared for those emergency protocols when we have that requirement. Is there any, I do want to invite someone or anyone to chime in. Was there anything that was an aha moment from this, from the introductions, or a critical issue that you realized maybe didn't get added to the Jamboard beforehand? All right. And that's okay. Let's go ahead and jump in because it is early and we might not have.
I can say some for you on that.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Jesus.
Yeah, I think out of our group, I heard a few districts, I guess, are working with the organization or ICS for schools that support with their planning, safety planning. So that is something I think we've always tried to handle in-house, but I think with everything else going on, it would be, I'm interested in getting a little bit more information if there is an organization that can help us kind of streamline things for us.
Yes, and there actually is a few organizations like that. And I know that it gets really sticky for the County Office of Education to be able to make recommendations. So that peer-to-peer connection and asking other districts, who are you using, is really going to be your best way to find that out. Let me give you a fair warning. Sometimes the contractors that are out there are using templates and they roll in. We had a really big district in our county that I was working with, and they contracted with a company that came in and gave them templates that had maps from other districts, that had blank pages, that had, and it just ended up being a mess. So do make sure before you get into a contract to reach out to other districts and say, who have you worked with? And can I talk to them? Because they tend to come out of the woodwork, especially after incidents hit the media. So I'm glad that you brought that up, Jesus, because, you know, like I said, you could have a full timer at one school that focuses on school safety. And I don't think anybody has that. It's a big job. And so consultants actually can help make sure that we're getting all of the best resources. And sometimes that expertise is helpful.
Ken, if you don't mind, can I chime in there as well?
Yes.
And Jesus, I'm glad you brought that up. There are a lot of resources out there. And to Ken's point, a lot of our districts and our charter partners, they do kind of dovetail the school safety and security responsibilities into other positions, right? And I know sometimes that can be challenging and you know, a huge undertaking to try to give it its due attention. There are a lot of vendors out there, a lot of partners, but to underscore what Ken's talking about, please ensure that we're vetting them appropriately. You know, and that could be, you know, like you mentioned, talking to districts that are working with them. Unfortunately, during large scale incidents such as Uvalde, most recently, you know, to that extent, a lot of vendors do come out of the woodworks. They do kind of repackage forms that may not be within compliance for your jurisdiction, your state, etc. Some of the localized ones here, a lot of our districts do work with, such as ICS for schools. But again, just I'm glad you brought that up. Let's make sure that we're vetting them appropriately.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. All right. One of the key things in school safety planning is to really just start with vision in mind and to identify what it is that you are working to get out of your safety plan. If you're working to get out of your safety plan a compliance document that just has all the boxes checked on what it is that we need to have, or that Ed Code says that we have to have, or that our lawyers say that we have to have, then really you probably didn't need to come to a training for that, because your risk management company could probably roll you out a 300-page template and it would check those boxes. But I think probably why you came to this workshop today, or one of the reasons that you came to this workshop today, is because you actually do believe that school safety planning is important and critical, not only for the academic success of our students, but also for their well-being and our staff well-being. More recently, I started to do some research on staff well-being. I made possibly the mistake of going back to school and focusing on the importance of staff well-being for teachers. And oftentimes we get into this rut of talking about self-care and preaching up self-care. And what does that do is that puts the responsibility on the staff person, and it kind of takes that our role as a system, as an educational system, in how we support staff. A safety plan is one place that we can start to show that support to staff because we care about them, because they care about our kids. Simon Sinek wrote an excellent book called Start With Why. And within that, he introduces the golden circle. I didn't read the whole book. I read sections of it that I really wanted to pull out. The gist of his book and probably the heart of it, you can get out of his TED Talk, which is like 18 minutes long. So I would encourage you at some point to check out Simon Sinek's TED Talk. He talks about the value of why. So he looks at organizations that focus more on the what and the how. And in safety planning, if we focus on the what and the how in our comprehensive school safety plan, we come up with checkbox compliance documents. But if we start instead with the why, and Simon Sinek, his example is Apple. Apple computers don't start with producing computers. That's not their driving force. Their driving force and their why and everything that they do is challenging the status quo. And in order to challenge the status quo, the way that they do that is they develop innovative computers that are easy to use, beautifully designed, and user-friendly. And those features are their how. The what just happens to be that they sell computers. If they focus first on selling computers, they would lose that why. And one of the reasons that Apple is so successful is that people buy into the why. It's a shared vision. It's a shared value statement, and not necessarily that people specifically like their computers, but it's that value statement. As we're developing our own school safety plans, we have that same opportunity to start with the why. I was in an all-day PD day yesterday with my school district, and I was working with a group of our PBIS site leaders. And one of the key challenges that they came up with was student and teacher engagement in the PBIS framework and in the key features of PBIS. And that framework, that engagement starts with why. If we are wondering and we're frustrated by the fact that staff don't do more or don't buy in more to the things that we're trying to get them to engage in, it might be because we've overlooked this step in our process for planning or implementation of any initiative. So as we venture into this, I want you to keep in the back of your mind, what is your why? What is your vision statement that you can use with your educational partners that you're going to engage in this process to get everyone on board? And if you genuinely engage and include these educational partners, and I'm going to talk about who that is, if we genuinely engage them, we're going to find a shared why. And then all of a sudden, you're going to have more people who buy into this safety plan beyond being obligated to participate in a fire drill. Safety is so much more than fire drills. So with effective school safety planning, researchers have actually found that we can have improved academic outcomes, improved attendance, increased time on task, improved morale. Like there's this whole list of benefits, and I don't think that this list is even comprehensive. Some of the key challenges that we have, parent community involvement and engagement and buy-in, we can actually engage that and make that a goal of our school safety plan. Report after report that comes out, and I don't know if I trust this data because oftentimes these reports come out after a major incident in school safety. But report after report says that parents' #1 concern with education is not academics, is not testing, is not even cultural relevance theory. No. CRT. Why is my brain blanking on that? I've been away from my equity work group for too long. But culturally responsive teaching, that's not parents' first priority. Their parents' first priority is school safety. PBIS is another area that really gives us a lot of value for the work that we put into it. This is a terribly crowded slide. I do that on purpose because there is endless research on the effectiveness and the outcomes for PBIS if we do it right. And there's a fidelity checklist for that. If you want more information on the research behind PBIS and what makes it an evidence-based framework, there's a bit.ly link there on the screen for you. But really, school-wide PBIS can help to improve a lot of the same outcomes that effective school safety planning does. And I don't think that that's coincidence. I think it's because if we implement initiatives and frameworks with an eye for student wellness and student safety, connectedness, and belonging, that we can start to see these outcomes come to reality. One of the key things that I like in this slide of all of them is the increased perception of teacher efficacy. Collective efficacy is one of the biggest things that we can do to impact academic outcomes. So if we can do small things like safety planning and school-wide PBIS implementation, which actually is not a small thing, but if we can really invest in those key foundational items and build up teacher efficacy, then that's where we're going to get the bang for our buck. So our why is really to focus on students. We also and I think I mentioned this earlier, or maybe I'm remembering a presentation I was doing yesterday in the PD, but our focus on students also needs to make sure that we're focusing on staff almost first. If we focus on educators first, they will be better equipped to focus on students as a collective. And so as we consider our why, we then quickly move into the what and the how. Because we can focus on student safety, and even if we have an effective multi-tiered system of support that makes sure the right interventions are delivered to the right students quickly and effectively, we get quickly overwhelmed because there's a lot of stuff going on in our communities, in our homes, and that is trickling onto school campuses. So it becomes very difficult for us to maintain this level of community. And fortunately, we have these wonderful pieces of legislation that help us to develop effective plans. And that image on the right is really how it feels sometimes, because comprehensive school safety planning was first required, I believe, back in the 90s. It could have been before that, but the school safety planning mandate in Ed Code 32280, that started in the 90s. And then people started to plug things in. And then there was a bullying prevention plan that was added in about 10 years ago. About 5 years ago, there was a suicide prevention, intervention, and response plan that was plugged in. And all of these things start to plug in, but we never stop to revisit the original. And perhaps instead of plugging things in, we should look at integrating the three. So I'll talk a little bit today about how these overlap and how we can integrate these strategies. There's nothing that says that we can't include bullying prevention as one of our key safety plan strategies. There's nothing that says that we can't include student mental wellness as part of our safety plan strategies. If we integrate those together, we really start to leverage our resources and we can come up with a more integrated, comprehensive school safety plan for safe and supportive schools. So there will still be required plans for bully prevention and suicide prevention. What I would recommend is to have those noted as appendices within your comprehensive school safety plan, but make sure that the action elements are included within the action plan component of your safety plan that we'll talk about today. And this is really the what. The how we do it is this 7-step planning process that was first published in 2002 by the California Department of Education. So we've covered the why, which is our vision statement, the what is our school safety plans, and the how is the process that we use to get there. And one of the great things that I like about that Simon Sinek, and I won't get too far into the woods of psychology, but he ties the golden circle to the physiological construction of the brain. And it's not just a theory that he has about how the golden circle works, but that why is actually tied to the physiological emotional response of all humans. If we can connect at that level, the what and the why becomes a little bit more easy. That's one of the reasons why I like it so much. So the 7-step planning process starts by identifying our planning committee members, making sure that we have all of the right partners together. The nice thing is that EdCode provides the starting point for us. It tells us the minimum level that we need to have involved in the process. Don't stop there. Include others. Include anyone who I think is willing to sign up for it. Because if you have someone who's willing to raise their hand and say, I volunteer for school safety committee, I would say engage them definitely. Creating, and then I talked about the why too, is really where we hone in on that vision statement, and our safety plan should have a vision statement. And I believe it should actually reflect our school district vision statement. We always need to use data. So 3, 4, and 5 are actually 3 steps that come together. Within our ongoing instructional practices assessment, we often use the Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle, the PDSA. Within the PBIS framework, we have a data, action planning, problem solving circle. Oftentimes, we have these continuous cycles of improvement. All of those cycles require the use of data in order to be effective. And there's 2 key types of data. There's fidelity data, which tells us, are we doing what we said we were going to do? And there's outcome data that tells us, does it matter? Are we making a difference on the metrics that we wanted to improve? Based on the data that we collect out of the gate, which is our assessment data, our initial plan, we're going to look at areas that we want to change. We're going to establish some major goals, and then we start to build the action plan from there. The next, after those key objectives, we develop action items that are measurable. SMART objectives are specific. They have time-bound elements, deadlines on them. They are relevant to what we're trying to achieve, and there's clear action items. A clear action item, by the way, also has someone assigned to do that. So we'll get more in depth on that process, but 3, 4, and 5 is really the meat of your safety plan. If the meat of your safety plan is a fire drill schedule, we've missed the boat. I get dismayed when I hear key educational leaders, and I'm talking about our top educational leaders, that when they talk about school safety, they jump straight to active shooter. They jump straight to school resource officers. They jump straight to earthquake procedures. That is a component of school safety, but that is a small blip in the overall schedule of our students' experience. They may unfortunately experience a handful of those incidents throughout their entire career, but every single day, they sense from their peers and from their educators on campus whether or not they belong, whether or not they are connected and cared for. That's where our school safety plan needs to focus. Not that the other stuff isn't important, but our focus needs to start on connection and belonging. Once we have this plan in place, we want to make sure that we're communicating the safety plan to the public. And a key part of that step is our teachers. The more we bring the safety plan to the front with our teachers, the more they will be ready to buy in, the more they will understand, oh, when I stand at the door and greet students, that's a safety plan element. That's not just because you want me to catch kids that are tardy. No, that's part of building connections. There's all kinds of research on that specific practice. Student greetings at the door, tons of research, increased time on task, increased students that feel safe, increase in students that report teachers who care about them. So just as a small example, sometimes the things that we ask teachers to do If we ask them without connecting it to our why, then it's just another thing on their plate, and it might not be that, it might not hit their priority. In the end, we want to look back at our safety plan, evaluate the progress, see, did we do the things that we said we were going to do, and did it matter? And then revise, rinse, and repeat. That's the annual safety planning process. If we nail down these 7 steps, we're going to have a comprehensive and effective plan that people buy into. So within Ed Code 32282, there are, well, gosh, let me count those up. 10 key elements that need to be included. I would encourage you in your plan document format to actually label them with the letters included here. Because then when you have someone come in and do an audit or do a review, if you have it specifically labeled 32282 section A, then it's going to be quick and easy to find. I will show you a sample plan today on how I did that. And the headings in the safety plan are exactly the terms that are used here. It's going to be helpful when you have one of those program monitoring audits and they come and visit your school. It'll be easy for them to find these elements. Within this safety plan, a lot of these items are board policies, like child abuse reporting procedures. That's a standard board policy. And everyone is trained up on that through mandated reporter training every year. You don't have to regurgitate the entire board policy. Take your board policy, include a summary of it, and then reference where people can find the full board policy if they're interested enough to go looking for it. That's going to shrink your plan and make it more accessible to more of your educational partners. The moment you print up a board policy and lay it out on a paper for someone, you've lost most people, because most people aren't readers of board policies or legislation, and their mind kind of goes into shutdown mode. But if you write a friendly summary, think blog article, right? Think of those education blogs that you read about legislation, and they sum up legislation in a nice, succinct little paragraph, and then they have a link to go to. Make your safety plan like that. That's what's going to make it more accessible. The requirement to have safety plans accessible to parents. One of the questions that I've had is, well, parents have to be able to access this, so I need to include the full board policy. Parents can also access your board policy. So if you have that policy or that reference in another public location, it's fine to summarize it and say, for the full policy, go to this link at this website. That works. Some of these are going to require additional work, and we'll get into that. So this is just a preview of all of the components that are required. Don't worry, I've got it. Yes, Ben, go for it.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but I just want to ask a general question based on that guidance. In general, for areas that there may be lots of supporting documentation, is that an approach that's okay to take if it's in any public place already? Or is that kind of restricted to certain ones that you would say there's a board policy for?
I would do it for all of them, but that's my argument. Now, you might meet with your district attorney or not your district attorney, but the lawyer for your school district, and they might say that guy's nuts. I wouldn't recommend that. But you're going to have attorneys that disagree with this kind of stuff. So if you are a school district that hasn't used this model before and you're a little bit, you just want to double check it, please do run this past your council so that they're able to provide input. I have not found any issues with this. I've shared the model with Department of Education. They have shared it out with other districts. It doesn't mean, so for example, disaster procedures, that can be intense. And there are some components of that you can't really boil down, but you can talk about it. And I'll show you how I did it, because there's board policies on disaster procedures too. So in the model that I have, I talk about the board policies, and then I talk about the general response procedures that are in place. And then as an appendix to the comprehensive school safety plan, I have basics on the general threats for school safety and what the district and what the school might do in that. Now, the school district that I wrote this for, they worked with a retired law enforcement officer, and he put together a very detailed tactical response plan that requires training and requires practice. That's not included in the comprehensive school safety plan, but we've summarized it enough that parents know that it's there. We've done our due diligence and public notification.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm always willing to be wrong, but I'm very confident that I'm right. Okay, so there's been some questions on annual review and approval. So I really want to make sure that we hone in on a key date here. School safety plans are required to be reviewed annually and updated by March 1st. And that's a bizarre date. I know that's a weird date. I can't even figure out is that March 1st date for the plan of the current school year, or is that March 1st date for the plan of the next school year? If we're reviewing data for a school safety plan, we don't have it yet for the next year. And if we're writing a plan for the current year, it's too late by March 1st. So here's how I address this. In my model plan is a 2-year plan. It doesn't mean that I'm only reviewing it every 2 years. You still have to review it every year. But the 2-year window slides 1 year every single time I write this. I first did this in order to help clarify, well, what are we planning for? If we're planning for a 2-year window, then the data that we're looking at, it still applies for a couple of years. That's not an overly large window to address. As I started to use that just to address this March 1st question that I had, I actually started to find that a lot of the safety actions, like if we're researching putting up more fencing, that's not a 1-year process usually. And so it's helpful to almost have this 2-year process because most of our action elements wound up taking more than 1 year. And that's fine to do. Now, it doesn't mean also that you have to wait till March 1st. So you might have a school district that says, Ken, this isn't a problem for us because we've been ahead of the game for years and we do our safety plan during the summer and we have it updated and adopted in September of every year. That's excellent. You're meeting the March 1st deadline. And then comes in this October 15th deadline. It certainly isn't helped when California Department of Education sends out a letter to all of the school districts that says, hey, safety plans, October 15th. The October 15th date within Ed Code is the date that school districts have to snitch on schools within their district that don't have a current safety plan. And sorry for downplaying it with the term snitch, but really it's report of non-compliance. So district offices by October 15th have to report to CDE every year any of their schools that are not compliant with the safety plan. I don't know about you, but I don't know a single district office that is going to report to CDE, we have a school that's non-compliant before they're going to go to that school and say, hey, let's get your safety plan done. So I'm expressing some of my frustration with that component. Essentially, when it comes to school safety plan, the October 15th date is far less important. Focus on that March 1st date, update your plans by that date each year. The second piece of confusion, who do I send my plan to for approval? You send your plan for approval to the same place that you're going to send your LCAP. Actually, and I'll just leave it at that, your LCAP, because it's not the County Office of Education who approves the LCAP. Well, in general, actually, I say that, and county offices do have an approval role for LCAPs, don't they? Initially, though, your LCAP is approved by your district office. So whoever is your administrative office as a local education agency or an LEA, that's who you send your safety plan for approval. So if you're a school district, or if you're a school within a regular traditional school district, you don't have to send it to the County Office of Ed for approval. Did that make sense? Did I clarify that or did I confuse it? All right. I'm not hearing any questions and I'm not seeing anybody fall out of their chairs. So send your safety plan to your school district office for approval. Now there's some question on what approval means. A school safety plan has to allow for input from the public at the school site. If you're a small school district with one or just a couple of schools, you may be able to accomplish this in a board meeting. So then your safety plan could be approved by the board, because as an action item, then we would have an opportunity for public comment. So that can kind of check off two of those things. And I'm seeing some questions pop up here. So let me go to Cindy. Your hand came up first.
Yes, I feel like a winner. No, I'm just kidding. I'm actually, my question in regards to the annual review and approval. We usually have like our, I guess our ICA or our emergency tree on there. And we get it approved for the following school year, but we have so many people come and go sometimes that even though it got approved, we have it in our website, it's accessible to all. In the fall, we update that one page for it to actually have the names of the actual people that are on site. Do I need to get that approved again? I don't know how to go about that, because it's like we're planning getting it approved by March for a school year that's upcoming, and we don't know if those same human beings are going to be there, but they're assigned to it. Do you have any tips? Am I doing it wrong?
No, you're doing it right.
Okay.
That's fine. What I do is the public document in my model plan and the small school district that I worked with on it, their board approves the safety plan every year, and there's a signature page and everything. So within that safety plan, I don't make changes to that part throughout the year, but the ICS chart, the incident command response team, the calling list, the things that change throughout the year, those are attached as appendices. The appendices of this safety plan are protected documents, so they don't even get shared with the board in an open session. We update those throughout the year as needed.
So should I just omit that part, or not omit it, but like say, ICS, tree on site, and then just hold that spot for it? I feel like it's something that's getting approved that is not accurate and needs to be updated. So would it be okay if, so what you're saying is that just say it's appendices on site, available on site.
Yep.
And then just have a placeholder for it.
Absolutely. And I would, so there's two things. I keep saying yes, and this is really a district decision. You may have a school board that says, yeah, we want to approve the plan, but we're okay if you want to revise it throughout the year.
Okay.
I'll keep saying yes, because that's how I do it.
That's okay. I just need to know that it's been okay somewhere else, and then I can actually just say it wasn't just a Cindy thought,
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Thank you.
All right, Michelle.
So my job is here at the county office, and I work with the charter schools department. We oversee 22 different charter schools, but there are that have been authorized by the county board, but there are also tons of charter schools across Santa Clara County. And so I have questions about the safety plan and making sure, because I know that there are certain things that have to be in a charter school one that don't have to be in others. And so this March 1st deadline is everyone has to have it done. I know that's an ed code, but then we have that October 15th where we have to approve. Is the county office approving the chart, approving all of them? I mean, I just want to make sure I'm understanding the ins and outs, because I know that there's a difference with regards to charter schools. And I've reviewed every single one of the charter school ones that I've received, and I've noticed some things that are missing, like getting the fire life safety sign-offs on everything. So I know that that's something we need to go back through and make sure that it gets done, but just walk me through what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah, so for the charter schools that you have authority over, that you approve,
Yes.
then you're the LEA, really, that is the approver of their.
No. They're the individual LEAs. So each charter school is an LEA in and of itself. So their
Okay.
board has to approve theirs. But then
Correct.
the law says that the county office is supposed to review and approve and notify CDE of non-compliance by October 15th. So am I still technically approving? Or is their board approving and I'm reviewing and notifying CDE of compliance? So I want to make sure I'm getting it straight of what I'm supposed to be doing.
You know, Michelle, you've hit into a territory, especially in charter education, that I do not have that. I don't know. When
I
it
can
comes
accept
to-
that answer.
When it comes to Ed Code 32280, it says that all California public schools K-12. And so however charter lands in that, in my experience with charter, so when I was at the County Office of Ed in Stanislaus, we had a couple of charter schools that were actually our schools. Those were the safety plans that I approved as our county office. The other charter schools, they did their own safety plan. And like you said, their board as an individual LEA, they approved it. But I don't remember approving, but that might have been part of the charter branch that I didn't do stuff with. So I guess I would either parking lot this item, and I can do some research for you, or I would connect with your charter school folks at CDE to see if they have guidance on that. Because as far as I'm aware, there wasn't differences in the safety requirements for charter schools, but I'm hearing you say that there are some, so I'm curious. But we might need to parking lot it and come back to that.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, Jesus.
Just wanted to clarify, because I read the ed code and it just talks about meeting that March deadline for the schools to update by that date. Subsequent to that, when I kind of took over this process here at our district, they were due like a 2-year board approval on the safety plans. So my question has always been, like, do they have to be approved by our board every year? Or do I simply have to go back and let the schools know, update your information, like you said, the ICS teams, because there's been staff turnover, and I need your updated plan by March, right? And so we can review it and approve it. So anyway, any clarification on that would be greatly appreciated.
So as I understand it, for a long time, I've said that the board had to approve it. And someone pushed me on that. And I'm like, no, I'm almost certain. And I went back and I couldn't prove it. So I was wrong. For years, I was wrong. I think it's simpler to have the board approve, because then you're also able to count another public comment element. Plus, I don't know many boards that don't want to look at the safety plan because it looks good on their, on their ballot, on their campaign posters. But I think that your district office, and that's why I was just looking at this to get to an answer. So each school has to adopt by March 1st. And then each school shall forward its comprehensive school safety plan to the school district for approval. So to me, that tells me that a school district can have an office like, well, Michael serves it for the county office, but you could be the approver. If you are working at the school district, Jesus, you could be the approver of the plans for that off year. So I don't see necessarily a weakness in having the board only look at it every 2 years. And then the district office is the approver for that year in between. Ed Code does not differentiate. It does not require boards to adopt it. The reason I recommend that is that it gives you an extra opportunity for public comment.
That helps. Thank you so much.
Yeah, certainly. And there have, I got a couple of questions in the chat box. Is there someone who can review plans and provide feedback? Michael, is that something that your office has the capacity to do?
Really depends on the amount of volume coming through. My department is one, so very, very small here. So hopefully, this type of forum can give people the confidence for their plans, but I think it'd have to be on a case-by-case basis.
Here's what I would recommend. Because Michael, I'm with you. I would love to volunteer, but the time element that builds up on reviewing those, find a buddy within this room today and agree to review each other's plans. Because really the ed code, and there's a checklist, one of the items in the resource folder under plan templates and samples. Oh no, where did I put that? Maybe in the checklist, sorry, as I find this really quick. And actually, I don't have it in here, so I'm gonna parking lot that. I need to add the checklist back in here. There is a checklist that you can use from California Department of Education. It was actually a checklist that I developed at Stanislaus County House of Ed. And then they have taken it over and they continue to update and revise it. As long as you can check all those items off, you're compliant, you're good. But if you want to swap with others, or if you have something, if you're trying to use something and be innovative in the way that you're doing a safety plan, that's good. Go ahead and send me an email. My contact information is at the end of this presentation. I'm happy to answer questions and to provide some basic level feedback. And I'm okay letting you know if the request is too much time. So don't hesitate asking, just allow that space. Checklist. All right, and Dr. Puerta Sarmiento, I see your hand up there.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
My question seems to be kind of relevant, but may not, so feel free to put a pin in it. But we're talking about approvals, access, that kind of compliance. And, everybody's safety plans, it sounds like, are a little bit, some are more comprehensive. When somebody said earlier, 25 pages, I was like, I love that idea. Here's my question. Hopefully it makes sense. When you were mentioning, of course, that we make it accessible to everybody to be able to see, I've heard different trains of thought through the years, and especially with school safety in terms of shooting and everything else. I've heard through colleagues in different districts and everything else that when we make our safety plans accessible for our community to see, is there any part of the plans that not necessarily omit but redact? Like, for example, I've heard a train of thought that we don't want it to be public, like if schools have to evacuate to a secondary location, that might not be something that you put up there. So just was wondering, is there like some specific information? Do we post everything with it? Does that question even make sense?
That absolutely does make sense. And I've never posted an evacuation map in a public safety plan. I was even doing it before Ed Code gave us the legal right to do that, because there's actually a presidential directive, a really tiny blip in FEMA that gives public agencies the ability to say, no, in order to protect the public safety, we're not going to share this, even with the media. So you can even play hardball with the media and say, we're not going to share this. I'm not saying you won't get sued, but you'll probably win in the long run. So let me show you, I put up the safety plan template because I think this is the easiest way to answer this question. So this is for Hillmar. It's a small school district, so it includes multiple schools. So please know that if you are a large school district and you have more than 2,500 students, every single school site has to go through this safety planning process and have their own document. If you're a small school district, you get more flexibility. And we'll get to that, but I wanted to point that out right out of the gate. Here's my table of contents. Notice it says 39 pages down at the bottom of the table of contents. All of this, the safety plan appendices, we don't always include that in the public version because the actual safety plan is this chunk up here. All of the components are there. Within this safety plan, and I'm going to jump down to page 23 because it describes that protected information. Notice on the table of contents, it says this page is confidential, this page is confidential. That's a way that we say right out of the gate, you're not seeing it, and we're okay with that. If I scroll all the way down to page 23, oh, look at that. There's actually, we did include an evacuation map. So Dr. Paredes Sarmiento, I need to correct myself. This is our generic evacuation map. That is the same one as what's posted in every classroom. So it doesn't show secondary. It doesn't show a lot of detail. It shows the kids where they're going to go. And it doesn't take much to get that. So I know that there's a lot of debate, and we could get into a good philosophical debate on what to include and what not to include to share publicly. But this is that evacuation. But I digress here. So here's what we do with confidential. We show you the template, we show you the tool that we use, and it's blank.
Okay.
If I scroll up to 23, which is where I was headed, this describes our rights as a school district to not share this information publicly as otherwise required in Ed Code. So Ed Code has a section in 32-282 that says some appendices with proprietary information and information that may make us vulnerable if we share it will not be shared. If your board is approving these plans, they can review this in a closed session. If your board wants to get into the nitty-gritty, they can do it in a closed session. Is that, was that good?
Yes, thank you.
All right, and Michelle, I see your hand up, and then we'll move back in.
So yeah, you had said that if you're a school district or a small school district of less than 2,500 students, then you can do one for the entire organization. But if you have larger, then you have to do individual ones. So how does that equate to charter management organizations that have multiple districts, multiple areas, and they do one for the entire organization? Is that the same issue, or should each individual school, because they're all their own LEAs, should they all be doing their own individual safety plans?
You know, Michelle, the way that I have operated in regards to charter schools is that the LEA is the district level. And so in Ed Code, it says that the small school district is the LEA. So if that's where charters draw that line, that's what I would go with.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much.
So the other components on this slide, we've already talked about that they need to be publicly available. I include notify in writing because this is explicitly stated in Ed Code. So we are required to notify in writing when we start to develop our safety plan, and especially when we schedule this public meeting, we must notify in writing all of these entities. And yes, it does say the local mayor. So I don't know about you, we might be able to get our mayor to come to a school safety meeting, but we're a pretty small town. The town that I wrote, the Hilmar, is our other town example. They don't even have a mayor. They're unincorporated. So anyway, invite these folks. You're going to invite most of these folks just by doing a blast out on your parent square or your whatever your district notification system is. They're going to get this alert. But the goal, I guess the spirit of the local mayor, engage your law enforcement, engage your emergency response partners. The required planning partners, so the school site council or a delegated committee should be the one developing this plan. The reason I put that there, that's not explicitly stated, but when you look back at the delegated, the required committee members here, that's your school site council, right? So if you already have these folks around the table at your school site council, then you can actually have them develop your safety plan. Now, if your school site council is too busy and they don't have the time to also do the safety plan, then you can delegate it off to another committee, but you still must have these listed required participants. The nice thing about the small school district exception, do we have anybody that falls into that besides the charter school question that Michelle asked? So I'm not seeing any hands. That's a bummer. Because, oh, there's one. Lori's small school district. So here's the great thing with the small school district. If you are less than 2,500, you actually don't even need a committee. Now, do I recommend that? No. But if you end up writing this as a small school district in your district office and you're engaging these partners, then you will still be compliant. So the under 2,500, one safety plan for the entire district, and it can be written and developed by anyone, and you'll be compliant. Now, the other part of this, you're not exempt from. All school districts, all LEAs and school sites must consult. This is a shall item. Law enforcement, fire, and other first responders in your emergency planning. So sometimes law enforcement and fire, they don't want to be there when you're talking about mandated reporter training. They don't care. But they probably want to be there when you're planning where your evacuation routes are going to be. I had one school that I was working with, they had a beautiful evacuation map drawn up. And then fire came around to watch a fire drill once, and they said, why are you having kids stand there? And they said, well, that's where our map had them go. And the fire chief that was standing there said, well, that's where we would park our trucks. So that's just a simple example of why we want to engage. Now we're actually required to by law. So it's in Ed Code that we must consult. I don't know about your area, but it's difficult for us to get law enforcement and fire at the table just because they're really busy. The key to that, establish good working relationships with those agencies so that you're not asking them to just come in and look at a document with you. If you have those partnerships, the best way is to have them be part of this committee. But in order to be compliant, finish the plan, make it a draft, send it to them, and say, can you please provide feedback on this? From a compliance checklist item, what I've done in the past is that I save a copy of that email and I note in the planning documents. So I have a section on safety planning processes and steps that I've taken. I note when I consulted with law enforcement. So fire inspections conducted, draft of the safety plan was sent somewhere in this list. It should be there. Maybe just in fire inspection. So if you send it and they don't provide any feedback, then we've done our due diligence to consult. Don't hold up your entire process and miss the deadline because you're not getting a response. If you need help connecting with local agencies, I would recommend calling up your friend Michael Vallez at the County Office of Education.
And Ken, I'm glad you brought that up, not just giving me a call. I know that some school districts as well have used the parent approach as kind of a dual purpose, because at times your parents are part of law enforcement or the fire department. So I know that some districts, some schools have used that to their advantage, because you nailed it here in the greater San Jose area, for example, trying to pin down law enforcement or fire department personnel. It's a chore. It's really a chore to get them in there and really engage them. So, look for other options that may be readily available in front of you. That's been successful in many other districts as well.
All right, who's missing from this list? Any suggestions?
Students.
Yes, thank you, Michelle. Students are missing. So youth can be engaged in this process, and I would argue no matter what the grade level. Even if you have second grade students, you could go into a classroom and conduct a brief circle activity where you ask students to describe what it feels like to be on their playground. And they will quickly start to talk about elements related to safety. Now, I wouldn't send a survey out to second graders and ask them to complete a survey. That's not the kind of engagement. But whether it's at the data assessment level or at the higher grade levels, middle school and up, you can engage student leaders, associated student officers, etc., in this process. If you engage them, the buy-in will be stronger. In the old version of this workshop, when we used to spend a whole day talking about this stuff, we had this great video where we had a speaker to come out and talk about how when you engage students, they defend it for themselves. They carry it out. It's their work. And I think any safety plan that engages them in that way, they will be more likely to report incidents of bullying, to reach out and ask for help when they have a peer that's struggling with mental health issues, because they're engaged and they're partners on our campus. They're not customers. And sometimes, and this is a great resource, there's whole trainings on just youth engagement, and some of you probably could do that training. But I like this Hart's Ladder of Participation as a really quick glimpse at where and how we engage youth effectively versus just as tokens. If we're doing any of the three at the bottom, like if we're inviting a youth to sit in our committee, but we don't really ever explicitly ask them to do any of the work, they're a token member. Don't do that. It's better not to include them at that point. Make sure that you're hitting one of those upper rungs. So we're going to start with this first section of the workbook. Let me get back to that page. Lost my mouse. There it is. So on the safety planning workbook, this is going to be our first breakout activity. And I'm also recognizing, gosh, that we're halfway through our time already. So we're going to stop and take a break. And then we're going to tie in discussion on who is on your planning team. Because you probably don't know this information right now, what I want you to do is just use this as a brainstorming tool. Who do you know off the top of your head that is on your planning team, and who else do you think you could recruit? Here's a tip. Teachers that you have going through an administrative credential program are looking for opportunities to sink their teeth into an activity. That's oftentimes the folks who have the safety plan. New teachers and new administrators, sometimes they can't say no. So, hey, why not? And then what I want you to do is really think about the why. What is the vision for your school safety plan? Why is it that you want to pull these folks together and ask them to do this work for you? What do we need to create a school community where students feel safe, connected, and ready to learn? And also consider, if you're a school that has implemented PBIS, how can you implement your PBIS values of safe, respectful, responsible, and kind? So for the breakout rooms, let's make this a 15, no, scratch that. Yeah, no, a 15-minute breakout room, Keisha. And folks, what I'd like you to do is spend some of that time, 5, maybe 10 minutes for break. And then while you're on your break, no, I'm not going to ask you to do that. I was going to say, while you're on your break, think about this form. And then come back together and share briefly with your colleagues of who else is in the breakout room. We've had a lot of good conversation already. And I look at the clock and I am surprised that we're at the halfway point of our workshop. So I don't want to blow out anybody's mind. So do make sure that you take a break, step away for a moment, take that mindful opportunity, and then come on back. And we'll get started again, probably around 10:40. And Keisha's going to send you all into breakout rooms in the meantime.
Okay, the rooms have opened and you can join the room of your choice.
Thank you, Keisha. As we move ahead, we're going to start to talk about the assessment phase. This is step 3. This starts off that 3-step process where we're assessing, we're setting objectives and action items. And actually, there was a question in chat earlier that asked about objectives and action items. And however you phrase it, it'll work. So I know that some people have tasks, some people have objectives and measurable actions. All of those work. These are recommendations on how to accomplish component H. So within the assessment, my favorite sources are those that are listed on the left-hand side, but campus and local crime data is still required. So the reason that I question local crime data, unless you have a really solid partnership with your local law enforcement agency and they're able to provide really targeted information, what we're usually limited to is what we can find on real estate websites. And I just don't find that really helpful or effective in driving school safety planning. So what I would do, again, I'll encourage you, do your best to engage with law enforcement. Oftentimes, well, and actually here's a token that you can offer. I found in my experience in working with law enforcement, especially in regards to training, they often find it difficult to get onto a school campus to do their own active shooter training. So I was actually able to get more engagement when I found a school who was willing to let law enforcement come in and practice on their school site. I'm not talking about during the school day. What I'm talking about is during summer. We had some good exercises over spring break, and they would come out and they use fake ammunition. They do the whole bit. They play it out. It's actually quite entertaining to watch. So that's one way you could say, hey, if we open up our school site so that you can come out and do training, will you engage with us in this planning process? So that's a little token that you could offer them. But I find that the most relevant data to a comprehensive plan for safe and supportive schools is DataQuest, which is the information, your suspension and discipline information and attendance information that you report to CDE. That information is old. So if you're able to work with your IT department or whoever manages your data, collect that same information and create your own dashboard with more current information. Don't just rely on DataQuest. The California Healthy Kids Survey, most of the CDE grants now require this. It used to be only a requirement of TUPE, the Tobacco Use Prevention Education grants, but now it's required by, I think nearly all the grants that they've put out recently. It's a really helpful tool. It's not very expensive. And WestEd, who's the agency who provides that, they have some really cool dashboard and data analysis tools now. So I would encourage you to check out those tools. And then, of course, surveys or focus groups. Now, if you do a survey and don't look at all of the data, please don't send out surveys. Only do surveys for what you're going to look at. I don't know how many schools I showed up. I'm doing a safety assessment and I say, what did you learn from your parent surveys? And they reach into their file cabinet and they pull out a stack of paper and they're like, well, we haven't looked at them yet. And as a parent, I'm like, don't waste my time. So anyway, any questions on assessment? It's a fairly basic one. I would, I don't know. I love data. I could go for an hour on data alone. So I'm going to move through this so that I don't. A couple of additional data tools that I find helpful. The PLUS program is Peer Leaders Uniting Students. This is actually a program. I'm not necessarily trying to sell their full program. It's a high school strategy that you can engage students in measuring and action planning around school climate. But the survey tool that they use is available even if you don't use the PLUS program. So I like to put that here. Another excellent free tool for school climate is the school climate survey. available through PBIS apps. And that PBIS apps is developed by University of Oregon. Those are really specifically designed to support PBIS implementation, but the school climate survey includes a lot more than just behavior. And so it's free, it's online, it's instant, so you get the data right away. So if you go to pbisapps.org and then under the, actually it's not the applications menu, it's now the products menu. And under the products menu, look for PBIS assessment. Excellent free tool. On the, and I'm not going to do a breakout room here because we just did that one, and I do want to make sure that I don't cut anything off the end of this. But let me tell you how I think that that page of the workbook is helpful. So the data source that you're going to be looking at, you can check this. It's going to depend on what you have available at your school site. But one of the things I would prompt you to look for is what are the questions that other people might ask? We want to have other people at the table so that they're able to ask those questions. But sometimes we don't have the most challenging parents at the table. You might want to think about that. That might be a way to not make them the most challenging parents. But if we don't have the most challenging parent at the table, put their hat on for a moment and try and figure out what would they ask me? What would they challenge me about in regards to my survey data? When we look at our California Healthy Kids survey data, and we report that 90% of our students felt some level of safety, or at least they didn't feel unsafe on campus, that sounds kind of good. But then you might have that parent that says, wait, you mean to tell me that you're okay with 10% of your students not feeling safe? Ask questions in that way to push yourself on the data. Sometimes we get comfortable in reading the data in our own way, and challenge yourself. So another tool, this is not required, but I think that this is a helpful way to look at your data assessment and kind of look at how can we explore and grow through this process. It's a SWOT analysis, and SWOT analysis encourages us to look at both our strengths. What does our data show as something that we already do well? And then where is a gap? What do we need to improve in? When we look at opportunities, and then take strengths and leverage them to fill in those gaps. We don't have to be good at everything. I think that's something that sometimes we get lost in education. It's like, we got to do it all. Well, we do have to do it all, but guess what? We don't have to be great at all of it. We can be great at some of the things, and that fills in those gaps in the other areas. Or at least that's my argument. I haven't written that book yet. And then we want to look at our opportunities and our threats. So the opportunities are things that are coming forward. Look at all this funding for mental health in schools. So there's going to be grants that are coming out from CDE. There's a federal grant for school counselor and mental health professional positions. Right now, it's actually due next week. So our district did not get in the waters on that one because of the timeline. But more funding is coming out for student mental health. So leveraging the mental health priorities that our higher level governments are setting for us, that's going to help us grow with school safety and climate. But if we leave mental health out of our safety plan, we may miss that opportunity. And then our threats are our risk factors or emerging problems. I don't know about you, but marijuana continues to grow. I mean, it feels like there's no more room for it to grow, but it continues to grow as a problem on our campus. And that's all due to the community normalization with the legalization of it in our state. So within the required components, we're going to drill down a little bit on this slide that tells us what our required components are. But Ed Code says that we have to identify appropriate strategies and programs. It says that in a real general sort of way, and then it breaks into these 10 elements, and they get very specific. Some of these elements are going to be fairly general, but some of them will need more specific work. All of the ones that are not highlighted, so A, C, D, those don't need site level work. If you're a larger district, provide a template, provide boilerplate language that you can drop in on child abuse reporting procedures, on teacher notifications of dangerous pupils. And then just replicate that. If you're not at the district office and you're one of those school districts that all the schools are here, but nobody from the district office is, and you're looking around at each other saying, gosh, wouldn't that be nice? Split them up. One of you write A, one of you write C, one of you write D, and swap it. It's not called cheating when you're at work. The yellow items are items that may require some adjustment. If you're an elementary school district, your dress code is probably the same from school site to school site. If you're a K-12 district, I would imagine your elementary students may be allowed to wear tank tops, but not spaghetti straps, right? So elementary, you got to wear sleeves. Middle school, you're allowed to go to tank tops, and then high school, it's like, yeah, spaghetti straps and maybe no straps are okay, depending on your dress code. So you may have that variation. Rules and procedures for school discipline may also be different, as well as discrimination and harassment, but not necessarily. The items that definitely need site level attention are disaster procedures, safe ingress and egress, procedures for tactical response to criminal incidents, and a safe and orderly learning environment. The reason the pink items need specific attention at the school site level is those directly have to do with your facility. Nobody's going to share the same map. The item H, this is our meat. This is where safety planning turns fun. And it's actually a really oddly stated requirement in Ed Code. It's strategies for a safe and orderly learning environment. And my theory on that is that, whoever the original legislator was that wrote this, they put that in there as a catch-all. Like when we want to require something new, we can just say, oh, that's part of item H. We just didn't specifically put it in Ed Code. So the nice thing about catch-alls, it gives us flexibility. And that's where I think the fun is in this safety planning process. And that's really the how. All right, I'm going to toss this over to Michael. He's really the expert on the emergency operations side of the house. And he's going to cover the next couple slides.
Awesome. Thank you, Ken. Well, first of all, I believe that for many of us, myself included, it can be a pretty challenging question where to start, right? There's so many different options in relation to looking at the emergency or operational side of the house. One thing I did want to point out before I get into RAMs, please ensure that you have a great relationship with your first responders. Many local police departments already have established a school resource officer program, school liaison program. They obviously are great partners. They're our first responders. They are definitely someone we want to get on site, get their feedback on, incorporate that into our plans so that we can have those valid relationships already in place. Other resources, and you may or may not have utilized this yet, but RAMS is a great starting point in relation to the emergency operations plans. So RAMS is the Readiness and Emergency Management for Schools. It's a federal agency, and they have templates there for you. They have great resources, information, training. It's kind of a one-stop shop, and the great thing about it is it's all free. So it's not going to break the budget. It's something there that I try to promote as much as I can for anyone calling, because sometimes it's where do I start? How do I look at this? This is a great resource portal for you. And again, it offers so many different things involving emergency operations plan. I know Ken's going to kind of get into where the emergency operations plan rests in the spectrum of comprehensive school safety plans and procedures, etc. So definitely want to point your attention there. And next slide, please, Ken. Oh, actually, Ken's showing it here on the screen. REMS. So if that's your first jump into REMS, please don't make it your last. There's so many different resources, tools, trainings, as I mentioned, guidance, handheld technology. Even they have a great program called Site Assess. It's a downloadable app on your Android or iPhone. And it's an electronic way to do site assessments for your schools, to get all this information together. and to start going and analyzing data. To Ken's point, you can parcel it out, so you don't have to do the site assessment yourself. You can give different staff members responsibilities in different areas, and it's really putting an all hands on deck approach. And it's a handheld technology, so it's instantaneous upload, download, and you can get information out of there to see where you stand, what deficiencies may exist, and where your strengths are. Let's see, next slide there, Ken. And then in relation to school violence prevention, as we know, there's a shift occurring, or it's been occurring for a while, from a response-focused perspective to that of more preventative. And there are many great resources, again, that we could be utilizing. So the Sandy Hook Promise and the Building Connections through Berkeley are two examples. There's a bit.ly there for a fantastic video in relation to trying to see where your perspective is now and how we can focus or shift that focus to a more preventative approach. Threat assessment, the threat assessment teams are really the topic right now, and that's something, or the focus. So much so that the County Office of Education just hosted about 2 weeks ago threat assessment training, in-person training for districts here in the county as well as charters. If you didn't make it, that's okay. What our plan is, and we're actually, it's going through the Comprehensive School Threat Assessment Guidelines, or CSTAG, and that's a national threat assessment model. So the people that came were provided how this process works. Our plan here in the near future is to identify trainers or coaches in the CSTAG model to be trained up. It's a train the trainer, so that we can continue to provide this threat assessment model training for our partners here in the county on a continuous basis, so that it's not just a one and done approach. We're looking at doing this every year going forward. Threat assessment is exactly what it states, is how do we look at a threat? How do we gauge a threat from a 360 perspective or a holistic perspective? And that's, again, taking that preventative approach. And then lastly, if you are looking for a threat assessment model, sorry, that's my weather app. If you're looking for a threat assessment model other than CSTAG, REMS has a fantastic threat assessment model that they do train the trainer as well. So in case you don't want to wait until the CSTAG comes through, that threat assessment piece is there. And again, you can tell it, it says mental health teams, security and safety, welfare. It's really, like I said, it's the 360 approach. It's not just isolated into one silo of looking at threats before these threats become more tangible or more advanced. How do we get this information? What do we do with this information? And what are the proper steps to take? So please keep an eye out here in the county for more information on the CSTAG threat assessment piece. We're looking at getting that up and running very soon. And if you did attend earlier this month, I appreciate your support there. And hopefully you left the training with some great information on how to form threat assessment teams at site level. And once again, if you can please keep an eye or take a look at that video. It's a short video, very impactful video at the same time. And then Ken, I know that you added that the document on the bottom. I haven't had a chance to go through that yet. Would you mind covering that in relation to the updates?
Yeah, certainly. Sorry, Michael, that's I intended to do that for you. So there's some legislative updates that have come out, and there's a couple that I wanted to bring to your attention that are related to school safety, but I think, well, off the mark a bit. But let me just show them to you. So if you were to go into the resource folder, I'm going to show you where to find this, because I'm only going to talk about a couple that are highlighted. Under policy, legislation, and audit, if you scroll down, there's a legislative update alert, final October 2022. I did not write this legislative update. It comes from a trusted colleague of mine. His name is Sherman Garnett. You may have heard of him. He is an attorney and a member. He's the legislative representative for the California Association of Supervisors of Child Welfare and Attendance. He publishes this fairly regularly. So if you would like to get on this distribution list, shoot me an email and I can share you the email that you send to get on his list because he sends it out. So there's 2 items here that are related to violence prevention. AB 452, both of these were passed. So they are in place. They will be effective January 1st, and they will be required for schools to take action on for next school year. So we're not talking about immediate, but next school year, start planning ahead. AB 452 requires school districts to include within the parents, you know, the annual notifications that we send out to parents. It's like 58 pages long, 6-point font. We know nobody reads it, but they all sign it and it puts them on the hook for our policies. Within that document, we are now required to include notification on California's child access prevention laws related to firearms. I know it's out of our scope, but it's there. You have it. I think the legislators saw this as an opportunity because they knew that we had a captive audience with parents. We don't have to come up with this language on our own. CDE will come up with model language that we will use. So keep an eye out for that. The other one is related to the threat assessment that Michael was just talking about. SB 906 requires any employee of the school district to report to law enforcement any threat or perceived threat that a pupil is preparing to commit a homicidal act related to school or school activity. Now, this does not mean that every time a kindergarten student says to another kindergarten student, I'm going to end you, that we have to report them to law enforcement. In fact, I think that if that were to begin happening, we would start having equity issues all over the place. But what it does mean is that if after we go through our threat assessment process, as long as we have one, that we then recognize that this is a credible threat and we need help, we are required to report it to law enforcement. I think that this law was put into place because too often we've had schools and school districts try and go it alone or not feel like they have the support available at the local law enforcement agency. So this says if we feel like an actual threat is there, we got to report it. Next school year. Ben, I see your hand up. Go for it.
Yeah, I just wanted to say for 906, my understanding is it's only grades 6 to 12. Is that correct?
Good call. Yes, thank you for that correction, Ben. 612. So within our safety planning, we're talking a lot about different plans, and you've heard me kind of whine a bit about safety plans being minimized to fire drills and active shooter plans. That's a component of the layered safety planning framework that really, this is how I visualize it. This isn't an official document. This is something that I put together in hopes that it makes it a little bit more friendly. The Comprehensive School District Safety Plan is your umbrella document. This is the big picture. What do we do in our district to help all students feel safe, feel supported, connected, and belonging? Within that, there's a component that talks about emergency operations. The emergency operations plan is the plan that guides your crisis response team's action in coordinating the overall response. This is probably going to be one of your more intense plans. It will require a bunch of contingency plans, supplies, logistics, and this could be a training in and of itself, emergency operations planning. In fact, REMS, the resource that Michael just shared with you, they have some fabulous training tools and templates on emergency operations plan. Emergency response procedures then are the actions that we expect all staff and students to take in the event of an emergency. So these, the red arrow, pretty simple. Keep it basic. I've seen flip charts. When I first started doing school safety planning, I like to poke fun at myself for this. I developed a beautiful flip chart. Oh man, this thing had a plastic cover. It hung on the wall in every classroom. It was like 50 pages long and it had 18 color coordinated tabs. It was terrible. I thought it was fabulous, but what I ended up doing is I created a document that was so complicated it didn't help anybody. What I have found now, my favorite tool for emergency response procedures posted in classrooms is a poster that encompasses the 5 or 6 key responses that we follow for any hazard. Emergency response procedures don't need to handle specific hazards, but they do need to tell people how to evacuate. And we evacuate for fire drills. We sometimes evacuate for earthquake procedures. It needs to let us know, how do we lock down? How do we do duck and cover? There's really only 5 or 6 emergency response procedures that our staff and students should be aware of. The rest really falls into emergency operations planning. So I like to see those as posters. That's my favorite now. So as we're looking at crisis response procedures and what we're required to do, Ed Code requires, actually, technically, an earthquake plan. All hazards isn't technically required in there, but let's go ahead and plan for all hazards while we're at it. So we need to have a disaster plan for the safety and care of students and staff. In an earthquake, the response is drop and cover. On occasion, and especially, was it last week, 2 weeks ago, that we had the Great California Shakeout? And then, of course, in Santa Clara, you guys felt some shaking on Tuesday, right?
Yep, 5.1 on Tuesday.
We felt that over in Patterson even. It was probably more entertaining for us than for you guys. For us, it was just like, ooh, do you feel that? That was fun. So drop and cover is the procedure. During this time of year around the Great California Shakeout, you might have some folks that send you an email that advocates for the triangle of life. That has been debunked in our country. Our architecture and our engineering is different than where the research on that was done. So if you hear the triangle of life come out, just say it's wrong and point people to Michael, and he can have the argument with them. And if not, actually, if you go to the website for the Great California Shakeout, they specifically have information on why that is not the strategy we use. And then we need to have tactical procedures to respond to criminal incidents, including guns on campus and at school-related events. This is where I think law enforcement comes into their role is so important. As educators, we don't have expertise in the best tactical strategies for active shooters or guns on campus. We may have some folks who are trained handgun owners, who maybe are avid hunters, but unless they have law enforcement training, I would take their advice with, some caution. Rely on law enforcement is my bottom line. And then we also need procedures to use school facilities for disaster shelters. You all have board policies on this, and I would recommend just referring to that. Red Cross is actually the organization that will make the decisions on which schools are actually used for disaster shelters. There's a law that requires us to be open to it, but Red Cross is only going to take those that have certain facilities, and they have formulas for that. So if you don't have an active MOU with Red Cross, they won't be using you for a shelter because they'll have MOUs with everybody. Some of the background, so California was the first to require a standardized emergency management system that was called SEMS. That got put into place after the Oakland Hills fire. FEMA then put into place the National Incident Management System. They implemented that after 9/11. The nice thing is they modeled it off of SEMS, so we were already there. The one key point that I'd like to pull out of this is disaster service workers. All school personnel are legally mandated disaster service workers. They can be kept for work assignment for 72 hours. This means that if there was a really massive earthquake over in San Jose and families could not get to the school to pick up their children, sometimes they're anticipating that it may take up to 3 days. That means that school personnel can be activated to stay and help with that incident because we're disaster service workers. And that's not just schools, that's everybody. So REMS has some resources. REMS won't have resources on this. Cal Office of Emergency Services has resources on this. There's a handy little brochure that explains it. And when you got hired and you signed off on that 2-inch stack of paper that you sign off on when you get a new job at a school district, you signed a thing that said, yeah, I understand that. Barb, I see your hand up.
Yeah, where did you say we find that information on the disaster service workers?
Let me see if I have it. Actually, it's not in my resource folder. Let me go ahead and drop it in my resource folder for you. I have it in an older resource folder because we don't talk about it much here, but I will put it in this folder, the crisis response and violence prevention folder. Does that work for everybody?
Yes, thank you very much. We had a discussion about it the other day, so I think I just want to be able to bring this to the team.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Okay, so for required drills, this question comes up a lot too, because there's a lot of competing information when it comes to drills, and there's multiple layers of what's required for who. If you're an elementary site, that is grades 8 and down in this reference. So I know that grades 7 and 8 aren't always considered elementary. In this piece of ed code, it is. They require earthquake drills 4 times per year. And earthquake procedures, that's the drop and cover. If you're doing a lockdown drill and you don't do the duck and cover, get under your desk and hold on to the legs, that's not an earthquake drill. That's an active shooter or a campus intruder lockdown drill. Those are different. And guess what? Those aren't required. There is no current legislation that requires us to do lockdown drills for intruders. Now, does that mean that you shouldn't do them? No, that's going to be an important piece of the pie. But remember that that's in addition to the required drills on this slide. At the secondary level, we need to do a drop and cover earthquake drill twice per year. Now, can the California grade shakeout count? Absolutely. Make that one of your drills every year. So that's earthquake drills. Fire drills are different. Monthly grades TK through 8 must do fire drills. So Ed Code says one thing, and that I didn't even report it because Fire Code says has a greater requirement. And I think Ed Code, the variation actually says for intermediate grades, which is middle school grades, you don't have to do it monthly. There's a different pattern. But the Fire Code has different requirements. And I don't know many fire wardens that enforce Ed Code over Fire Code. So I would go with the greater requirement as much, even though it's harder to do. So monthly drills, grades 8 and down. Secondary for high school grades, you have to do 2 fire drills per year. Don't miss those. Create a log that shows when you did it. And you could get as fancy as you want with these. I've seen some school sites that have an assessment tool. How quickly did it take us to evacuate all students? They measure, they have teachers report in on issues that happen. Like let's say you have a student in a wheelchair. That's something that Ed Code specifically says, we need to have a plan that addresses students with special needs. And if you have a fire drill that during the rain, the fire path goes through a mud pit. I actually had a school site that I was doing a walkthrough on, and it was just after it rained, and the fire drill evacuation plan had them walking right through this mud. And they didn't know how someone in a wheelchair would be able to navigate that. Heck, or people on feet for that matter, because it's mud. So if you have other drills that you want to do, you have to add them onto this. I would love to see a legislator come in and create a more comprehensive drill approach so that we can touch all of the different issues and not have to do 28 drills a year. I was exaggerating. We're not required to do 28 drills. The encouraged components. So this, we're not mandated. So if you wanted to find a time to tune out, this would be the slide. But these are encouraged by Ed Code. Policies and procedures aimed at the prevention of bullying. Now it's kind of funny because they say that and it's only encouraged in this section of Ed Code, but there's a whole other section of Ed Code we're going to talk about in a second that requires a bullying prevention plan at the school district. Where practical, collaborate with other school site councils. So exactly what you're doing today in collaborating and learning about comprehensive safety planning, you're doing that. We need to have clear we're encouraged to have clear guidelines for roles and responsibilities of mental health professionals and related staff. And that should include strategies for the safety climate. So the comprehensive, remember that umbrella plan, but then also within our emergency operations plan, protocols on how to address mental health for crisis response. Encouraged. I would engage your school psychologists, your school social workers, and ask them, how would you support students? In our school district, it's mostly outside agencies that we partner with. We have folks that will come in and do grief counseling and crisis support. One of the tools that I have in the crisis response and violence prevention, because there's only a few in here, but it's an after action reports fact sheet, talks about the value of doing after action debriefs after every incident. We oftentimes forget this. A couple of years ago, we lost 2 high school girls in a car accident around this time of year. And we brought in a bunch of grief counselors. We brought in a bunch of people the Monday after it happened to provide support to students, to do the death notification. It was a whole process. What we missed doing is afterwards having a meeting with someone who could document the lessons learned. We didn't do too bad a job. We were able to support students, but we could have come out of that with a really clear documented plan on how to do it better next time. So an after action debriefing after any sort of incident you have is a really valuable meeting, but document it and make that part of your plan. All right, we got a couple plug-in plans here. One is bullying prevention. So it's suggested in Ed Code for safety planning, but you're required to have a separate plan. The original law was Seth's law, and it requires us to treat bullying just like discrimination, harassment, and intimidation. We have to have an investigation process. We have to notify the people who made the complaint, the student and the parent who was the target of the bullying, what the findings of the investigation were. And then there's some other components, but this is not a bullying prevention training. AB 2291 then increased that. We need to have specific procedures documented to prevent acts of bullying, including cyberbullying. We were required to have this in place a couple of years ago now. CDE has some samples available at their website. There's a bit.ly link to get to that website. And then CDE, this bill also required that all staff be offered training. And actually, I think this was updated recently that all staff be provided training. The online training module is available from CDE. It's okay. It's essentially the Ed Code, what we're required to do. Doesn't go into a lot of detail on how to support students who are targets of bullying. But your risk management company might have a package that you can use right alongside your mandated reporter. That's what our district started to use this year. And it's actually not bad. I'm not a fan of those types of trainings, but they did a good job with the bullying prevention, at least the company that we use. And now there's one on suicide prevention. So we need to have a policy on pupil suicide prevention, and we need to have a plan that covers prevention, intervention, and postvention. So once we lose a student to suicide, or if we have a student who survives a suicide attempt, what is the postvention actions that we will take? We need to have this for all schools in our district, grades 1 through 12. It could be just one district plan though. Every school site doesn't need it. So remember that earlier graphic with that super cool animated where they all come together in one plan. I would encourage you to integrate this as much as possible. But because these two plans are required plans, make them appendices within your safety plan, and so that they are their separate individual plans, but then incorporate them within component H. What are those strategies that you do? And we're going to get into component H in just a second. Within our suicide prevention plan, we need to specifically address youth who are grieving from suicide, youth with disabilities and mental illness and substance use disorders, youth experiencing homelessness or other out-of-home settings like foster youth, and then LGBTQ youth. These 4 groups are called out because these 4 groups have higher rates of suicide risk. And that's why they are specifically called out here. We must address training to be provided to staff. So our school district uses QPR, question, persuade, and refer for suicide prevention. The basic level training in that tool does not meet the recommendations set out by CDE, and we have to meet those recommendations. But if you add in youth protective factors and make sure that you're talking about your special populations, then you can make that training work. So Ed Code has some specific components of this. I'm not going to get into more detail on this. Are there any questions? Okay. Good news is we only have to update this plan every 5 years. A couple of other items on mental health. Oh, I have an outdated graphic. I need to have 988 on that graphic. So the Suicide Prevention Lifeline, they updated their hotline number. You can still call this old one. So if you still have these magnets hanging around, don't throw them away. They're still good, but 988 is the new number. We have to, on the back of our ID cards, for all students grades 7 and up, we have to print the Suicide Prevention Lifeline. We also have to print the crisis text line, which I believe that is 988 is a crisis text line. So I think we can knock that out with just one number now. We also need domestic violence hotline, also has to be printed on the back of student ID cards, but now I'm really getting off into the weeds here. Annually, we need to notify students how they can access mental health supports, and we have to notify parents and students twice each year. We do this 2 ways. One, we do it in our parent notification handbook, right? We just include it as a page. 2, we send it out we post it on our websites, and we usually, for good measure, do a 3rd. And during Suicide Prevention Month, we distribute the flyer. The way that this flyer looks for our district, I have a suicide prevention page here. I've got some sample suicide prevention plans. And our student mental health access flyer is just a 1-pager. It includes that 988 suicide crisis lifeline. And it basically just explains to students, the best route, talk to your teacher, talk to your school counselor. And then we include some local county mental health. How do they access resources there? Feel free to copy this, update it with your local information. You don't have to recreate the wheel. New this year, for implementation beginning with the 23-24 school year, we need another poster. So all of the information and some additional information that was just included, we need to create a poster that notifies students common behaviors of those experiencing mental health challenges, a list of local resources where they can get help, a list of coping strategies, and a list of negative coping strategies. This is a lot of information to put on a poster. This is one of those new laws where it's like, gosh, it seemed like a good idea at the time, but now there's so much required. This is a plugin. It's something that you could include in your safety plan for this year as an action item. And then we already have to do it, so you might as well include it. CDE is going to develop a model. They'll release it. This is going to sound bad, but the folks who work at CDE have to jump through a lot of hoops to get a model approved and released. So I wouldn't wait for that model in order to be compliant by the beginning of next school year. And I don't mean that to sound negative. I just want to let you know about the reality that they have a lot of hoops to jump through to get an item approved for release. Okay, so we shake off all those mandates. Go back to that later. When you sit down, go to the checklist that I referenced that I'm going to save. Let's talk about the meat. This is where we can have fun with our safety plan. And yes, I actually think we can have fun with the safety plan. So for component H, for a safe learning environment, how well does our school build a positive climate and offer a safe physical climate? There are two components here. One of these is people. How do people feel when they're on campus? Sometimes these things are difficult to come up with tangible items. And then place. How do we ensure a safe physical environment? So when you meet with parents and their key concern is fences, that's place. When you meet with parents and their key concern is my kid gets picked on, that's people. Both of those should have a place in your school safety plan. As we develop that assessment, we begin to ask ourselves, what are the things that we're already doing? The safety plan is not intended on creating a whole new task list of new things that you have to do. The safety plan is a way to capture and document those things that we already do really well. So within your committee and the group that you organize on this, ask them, what are some things that we're already doing well to build a positive school climate? And then what are some of those things where we're not? Students especially, we can engage in that process. And if they get together in a room and they're not willing to share, maybe there's a trust issue for them. Maybe have someone else ask the questions. This is where sometimes I share a swap of staff strategy. If you need someone to come in who doesn't know the students, who doesn't know your facility, we've got a nice little checklist, walkthrough checklist in the assessment tools folder in this resource file. And sometimes if you are on that campus day in and day out, you look over the same issue that someone brand new to campus is like, oh, you have a big hole in your parking lot. You might want to get that addressed. I was doing a walkthrough on an agricultural school in a rural setting, and they had big basins where the canals empty into, and one of the basins didn't have a grate over it. And it was a middle school. By that age, farm kids, they know not to get into the basin. But from a safety perspective, someone who came in from outside eyes, we were like, why don't you put a grate over that? So then when we get to action planning, I would encourage you to make your goals measurable, specific, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. This is where our objectives become really the tangible part of our action items. Once you develop objectives, then you put in actions and practices below those that will help you to meet those SMART goals. The steps 4, 5, and 6, this is helping you to identify those. Step 3 informs that starting point. Let me show you an example. I think that's going to be a really good way to visualize this. Under plan templates and samples, I'm going to go ahead and get into the Hillmar safety plan again. And I'm going to scroll to the middle of the plan. We're going to zoom in. So for a safe physical climate goal, it's one page. You don't have to list everything that you do with safe physical climate. You do a ton of stuff. You go out and sweep up the halls every single night. That's part of a safety strategy. You put up wet floor signs. You don't have to worry about all that. You don't have to worry about the risk management assessments that, you know, teachers get in trouble for having Windex in the classroom or whatever. We're not talking about that level of detail. What are the key objectives? So in this safe physical climate goal, our overall goal for physical safety, our schools are a source of pride in our community with safe, clean, and healthy facilities where our students can learn, achieve, and thrive. It's generic on purpose. We use that every single year. That's kind of a guiding vision statement. The first objective is identify and address secure critical facility vulnerabilities and hazards. During our assessment process from this school year, the feedback we got is that some of the alarms and bell systems weren't working as well as they needed to. Parts of campus couldn't hear it. There were still areas that didn't have any fencing. Yes, we still have schools in our area that don't have fences. And a lot of rural schools, you'll still have that. Some of your urban schools may even have that as well. So we included this. I identified resources. We're getting into a logic model here. Assign it to somebody. If you don't have someone assigned to it, then it probably won't get done. This is also, as the writer of the safety plan, when I'm doing my assessment and follow-up next year, this is who I call to say, hey, did this get done? Because I'm not going to have direct impact on these activities getting done, but I can call Jason and say, were you able to accomplish these items? My output measure is that our concerns will be reviewed and strategies will be developed. That's kind of a fidelity checklist, right? Did we do what we say we were going to do? Some of the output measures also are sort of outcome measures, but outputs are really those processes, the documentation, the tangible items that show that you did what you said you were going to do. For safe social climate goals, so when we're talking about people, our statement, students and staff thrive together in an environment of mutual respect, accountability, and commitment to excellence. I think I pulled that direct from the district's vision statement or mission statement. This is where we include PBIS, implementation, our output measures, TFI, the tiered fidelity inventory. Are we implementing with fidelity? We also expanded mental health clinicians. So this is one way that you could document your action plan. This action plan is a key training and outreach tool. The way that I transitioned this into an outreach tool, because even 29 pages, I'll tell you, is hard for some committees to swallow, right? That's still a pretty hefty document. I create a summary document. This is actually the document that I used to present this to the school board, because they got to the point where we're like, Ken, we don't want to see the whole safety plan. Just give us the key points. So in the safety plan update, it includes a brief on the legal mandate requirements, our vision, some assessment data that we track. These come straight out of California Healthy Kids Survey. But I'm getting to the point of, I document our action plan, which are the key strategies that we're going to use to provide safety this year in a bulleted list. You could start with this. I like the logic model table because it provides more detail. It makes sure that it's assigned to somebody and it gives us measurables. But you could provide the same information in a bulleted list. It's a little bit easier to work with, not quite so fancy, but this is another example that you could follow. Any questions on the goals, objectives, and strategies piece? These are some examples of breaking it out. So the objective, one of the issues that came up in our data is that we still had high levels of harassment. The measurable goal on this is that we wanted to see a 30% decrease as measured on the California Healthy Kids Survey. And then we also wanted to reduce our office discipline referrals. And then we were going to track that using discipline referral numbers. So when you include staff training in a safety plan, there's a couple of ways that you can measure success. One, did you actually provide the training? Number of staff trained, number of trainings provided. Those are two measures. Those are output measures. The other measure, sorry, my voice is going out. The other measure that you might want to include is outcome measure. So staff satisfaction in the training. Do they feel like they're better able to do their job? Are they better able to respond to bullying complaints? As an example of staff training. If you're doing facility, you could have facility checklists. You could have yard duty or campus security. do reports on people they find on campus that didn't sign into the office or aren't wearing a visitor pass. That's an ongoing assessment issue that I found with schools that I work with. More with schools that don't have fences, because if you have a fence and they're forced to go through the office, it's easier to get compliance. Are there any safety issues that you have or that you're experiencing that you're having a hard time coming up with a measurement for? All right. Before we break into a 10-minute session to share strategies on action items and overall goals, I want to introduce a couple of frameworks as we look at safe place and people, the climate part. So the resiliency wheel was developed by Nan Henderson and Mike Milstein, and they actually developed this off of the Kauai study. Kauai study was some of the seminal research that was done on resiliency in youth. And I Google Kauai study, you'll find the reports on it. But there are 6 key factors that we can put in the environment to help mitigate risk factors that youth have in their homes and in the community. We can help build resiliency and their ability to feel safe in the environment by increasing these 6 items. If you look at these 6 items, there are other organizations in our community that provide this in a maladaptive way. If we don't provide these on our school campuses or in other pro-social environments, then students can find these in gangs. This is why students join gangs, because they get these 6 protective factors, maybe not in the way that we would like them to get them, but they're looking for it somewhere. And this is why that becomes an issue. So if we can, within our strategies to provide a safe school climate, if we can look at these as guidance on what we should be including, and PBIS hits a lot of these. All right. So within our breakout room, what I want you to do is take a look at your action plan. When we did this in a full day workshop, I love to spend like 30 to 45 minutes on this part, but really in this setting, I want you to take a moment to look at the planning tool. On page 3, this is where we're establishing a goal. We're setting up a measurable objective, a SMART objective, and then we're coming up with some activities or strategies that may help us accomplish that objective. So talk about this with your group, maybe discuss how you've done this already, or how this might add to your strategy, the way that you're doing it currently. We're going to do a breakout room for, I'm going to give us 10 minutes, and that'll bring us to 11:50, and then I'm going to wrap up the day. Any questions on that? All right, and I see some folks may be stepping out for the ever fun lunch supervision. May the odds be ever in your favor on the playground. And we'll break for 10 minutes and come back. Thank you all.
Rooms are now open and you can join the room of your choice.
So I hope that tool is, again, just kind of helpful in guiding the conversation and moving forwards and getting into your safety plan. If you already have a safety plan in place, it may be an opportunity to check in and kind of see what components are already in there and make sure that you have all of the key sections covered and the key processes followed. So there are a few more requirements in regards to school safety planning. There are some communication strategies that are required to be done, and this is really step 6 in that 7-step process. We need to make sure that we have the plans available for public review, and then we need to make sure that we have that the opportunity for people to provide public comment, and that happens through that forum at the school site that we mentioned earlier on during the assessment process. The other part is that we have to make sure that staff are trained. So oftentimes, oh gosh, I'm sorry, were folks still in breakout rooms? So I've been training myself here for like the last 48 seconds. I'm thinking it was a Zoom thing that I couldn't see everybody. So welcome back, everybody. I hope that tool that you reviewed is a helpful tool to be able to either get that process started or to review the current safety plan that you have in place that you've been given to update, and to make sure that you have all the key segments and the key processes followed to be compliant. There are also some communication strategies that we need to follow. Some of these are specifically, explicitly included in Ed Code. We need to make sure that our safety plans are available for public review. This means that we should also be careful in what we include in our public document. For the school districts that I've worked with, I've actually had them have 2 different versions of safety plan. There's the complete internal version that has everything, and then there's that public version. And Ed Code does give us the right to not post confidential information within our safety plan. We also are required to provide staff training. And usually this takes place at the start of the year, you know, the back to school day where the principal reviews the safety plan and says, this is what we do for emergency procedures. That's kind of the minimal. But if you find ways to engage a safety element and go back to H, go back to component H, that action plan that you just developed, you may be able to drop a safety conversation in every single staff meeting. For 5 minutes, talk about what do I do when I have a student report bullying to me? 5 minutes, talk about it. What do I do when I see a student who looks like they may be experiencing a suicide crisis? 5 minutes, talk about it. It's a quick procedure. There's other trainings you could do, but if you're forced to squeeze it in, it's okay to be condensed. And then step 7 is to evaluate your progress and revise your plan. This is required annually, but you could do it on a more regular basis if you want. Some of the features, so I talked about the PBIS action item in that sample safety plan. Your PBIS teams should be meeting monthly. So some of that, you could see that as a safety plan item, that your PBIS team met and talked about discipline problems. They talk about their precise problem statement. That's really a safety planning element. So in measuring your process, the 2 key data points, let me reiterate, did we do what we say we were going to do, fidelity data, and did it matter? And that helps us to know if we didn't get to the location or the destination that we intended, then was it wrong directions to begin with? Or did I make a wrong turn? There's a tool, page 4 of that handbook, and we're not going to get into it, but page 4 kind of helps to set up a communication plan. For a public meeting at the school site, you can identify an existing meeting, or you can schedule your own. Any messaging that you do around school safety, I always recommend having 3 key points. And this comes from my old media training. When I worked in public health, I was the public information officer. So I worked with the media a lot. Any media person is going to come in with their agenda. I think any parent comes to a public meeting with an agenda. Have your key talking points that drive that conversation. I'm not saying ignore those other issues, but make sure that you're coming back and bringing people in on what's important, because sometimes they only have one portion of the view. Our role is to share with them the whole picture. So if we follow that 7-step planning process, we're going to have a great plan. We're going to be compliant, and it's going to be guided by the data that helps us make effective decisions. I want to drop in a few slides, and by dropping a few slides, that's pretty much what I mean. I've got some samples of how we can take our safety planning into the multi-tiered system of support realm. So PBIS is a framework that enhances the adoption and implementation of evidence-based practices that supports all students. We have 3 tiers. Tier 1 is what we provide to all students. 80% of those students are going to succeed just with those universal strategies. About 15% of our students are going to need more targeted intervention, additional supports. And then about 5% will need more intensive. This is where we're talking about special ed or mental health clinicians, behavioral plans. Within a PBIS framework, there are constant improvement cycles. This kind of looks like that 7-step planning process that we just reviewed, right? So I wanted to bring these up to highlight, we already do this stuff. We're already pretty good at it. Don't worry about reinventing the wheel. Engage with the processes and systems that you are already using and integrate safety within that. So if we tier our strategies, what safety elements, safety plan elements apply to all students? What safety plan elements or actions are more targeted and what are more intensive? These are some examples. So some universal strategies for safety. We're doing hazard and risk assessments. We're gathering data. We're providing staff training. Maybe we do social emotional learning curriculum for all students. School values, school-wide rules, PBIS, all universal. Well, PBIS tier 1 is all universal. And then we have targeted intervention strategies. So what's our process for reporting and investigating threats? That's more of a targeted intervention. We're not going to do that for all students, but just those students who need that support. What are some of our conflict resolution or maybe social emotional skills groups? If our entire plan is nothing but universal strategies, then we're kind of missing. Or if it's only crisis response, which is really a tier 1 strategy or a tier 3 issue, then we're kind of missing the whole comprehensive approach of safety planning. So I put this in as kind of another lens to look at your safety action plan. Did we cover our bases? Is our plan comprehensive? And then some additional resources that I'd like to share. These are not links. Well, they should be links, but if you copy and paste them from the PDF, then you can get to these websites. California Department of Education has some really good tools on school safety planning, bullying prevention, suicide prevention. That's where you should go to get those model plans for bully prevention and suicide prevention. Cal Schools, SCHLS.org is the website for WestEd and the California Healthy Kids Survey. And I think I hit on all of these. Oh, I didn't do stopbullying.gov. So that's a collaborative project with a bunch of the federal agencies on bullying prevention and intervention. They have some good tools. CHKS is on the other slide. And then suicide prevention, the 988 Lifeline, you can order materials from them for free. It's a fairly limited supply, but you can order them and you can download and print your own materials. So with that, I want to go ahead and wrap up for PBIS. Oh, one more plug for Santa Clara. Santa Clara County Office of Ed, they have an excellent regional technical assistance center. Their website is there. And we have come down to the end of our time. I really appreciate your participation. I know that a 3-hour Zoom is intense and I feel you. And I'm sorry for only getting in one break. At the beginning, every time we start this, Yi always says, Ken, make sure you plan for breaks. And then inevitably, I should have done more. There's a Survey Monkey. So right as I'm apologizing for not giving you breaks, can you please give us feedback on our training? So there's a Survey Monkey link there. We'd love to have your feedback so we know how we can improve and build on this for next year. If you have any additional, and the Survey Monkey link, by the way, is in the chat box. Thank you, Keisha. If you have any additional questions, my contact information is provided there, and so is Michael's. Don't hesitate to reach out and ask questions. Are there any questions now? All right. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.